Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of this Seax build. In the last video I forged out the blade, and so now it's time to finish it. I'm going to start by filing it to shape and getting the profile of the blade as close as I can to what the original would have looked like. Doing this by hand instead of the belt grinder obviously took quite a lot of time. So for those curious, I left a bit of text to show you just how long each part of the blade took to file down to shape. Now normally I quench in oil as it's a lot safer than quenching in water. However, for this project, in the hopes of retaining a bit more historical accuracy, I managed to convince myself to take the chance and try a water quench. And as you could imagine, it didn't go too well. I made the very brash decision of quenching it in normal room temperature water, which is quite stupid, as you never want a quench blade to get completely cold. I tried mitigating this by doing an interrupted quench where the blade is pulled out and stuck back into the water so the blade cools down slower. But since I never water quench, I have very little feeling for how fast a knife blade actually cools down in water. So when I pulled the blade out and I touched it, it was basically completely cold, which, to put it mildly, is it's not very good. So at this point, however, and in fact not until I was finished making the blade, did I realize it had cracks. And it wasn't because I just assumed that it didn't have any. I inspected the blade multiple times to try and see if there were some, but I just couldn't see them. So I just kept on working, thinking I had managed to pull off a successful water quench. Like shown in part 1, this knife has fullers on both sides of the blade, and then right below those fullers is a line of copper inlay. To start the fuller, I first trace a small line with one of the chisels, as the line scratched with the calipers can be a bit tricky to see in the light sometimes. Once that's done, I cut a square channel to remove the bulk of the material, and then afterwards I go in with a more D-shaped chisel to get the actual shape of the fuller. Now with both fullers done, I can start cutting in the groove into which the copper will be inlaid. Once it's deep enough, I can then do the undercut, which basically turns the groove from a square section into a dovetail, so that once the copper gets hammered in, it locks itself in place as the bottom of the groove is now wider than the top of it. Additionally, some small teeth are also raised in the center of the groove, which further helps the copper stay in there. And this especially, I find at least, helps when you initially start hammering in the copper so that it doesn't just fall out. The wire I'm using is just some old electrical wire that actually came from the very building that I'm in. And off camera I just hammered it into a slight rectangular cross section, and then I annealed it so that it's dead soft, which of course makes it easier to hammer into the groove. So this is the blade about 3-4 weeks after I finished it, and here you should be able to see those really nice hairline cracks. Now, despite these cracks obviously not being very fun, after having this blade lying around for nearly a month while I worked on other projects, something else actually really started bothering me even more than the cracks did, and that was the thickness of it. The original blade back when it was made would probably have been around 10 millimeters thick, and this one ended up at around 6 or 7 millimeters, so it's quite a big difference. So with all of this in mind, I of course had to make a second blade. I did use power tools for this one, as it would have just taken way too long to do all of this by hand again. However, when I forged out this blade, I did accidentally burn the edge of it, but I decided I would just keep going instead of starting over for a third time, and then just hope that it would grind out. And it mostly did, but there are still some extremely small cracks in that spot, so this knife is not going to be up for sale either, unfortunately, which sucks a bit for me, but yeah, that's life. In any case though, despite those cracks, I'm extremely happy with this blade. The wrought iron is the nicest I've ever seen of any of the stuff that I have, and the thickness of the blade is now of course accurate to the original, which is to me really what matters the most, as this is a lot more of a substantial blade now, especially when you compare it to the first one that I made. And I think that's pretty important when you're recreating something, that you really get the dimensions as close as you can, because otherwise then what's the point of doing a recreation in the first place. In the next part of this build, I'm going to make the handle and then get this knife finished, so if all that goes well, that video should be out in about 1 or 2 weeks. So that's it for now. Thank you guys for watching.